Hi, this is Demetria Clark with Homes by Demetria. Today's podcast episode is really going to be a starter. It's your first one, and it's my first one too. I've done lots of lectures and recordings before and other aspects of my life, but talking about homeownership and intergenerational wealth and connecting people with finding their home has always been something that's been more important to me than probably anybody knows except for my close circle. So in my other life, I run Birth Arts International, one of the largest doula training organizations in the world. And I run Heart of Herbs Herbal School, which was one of the first herbal schools online in the United States. And both of these have been around for about 23 to 25 years, depending upon which business. So I've done a lot of work with that and recordings for those. I've taught in colleges. I've also written a bunch of books. So if you go and you Google Demetria Clark or you search Demetria Clark at Amazon, you'll see the kind of books that I wrote. And now I really want to talk to you about something that's been equally important and as big of a passion for me as those two businesses, and that's homeownership. So I'm going to start you at the very beginning. And so your story may be very similar to this, or aspects of it you may be like, oh my gosh, this totally resonates with me. And maybe this lady does know what she's talking about. So homeownership for me had always been something that I really felt strongly about. I even remember like fantasizing living in our own home as a little kid. I remember, driving past these beautiful houses and thinking, oh, I want to live in something like that one day. I remember we traveled a lot. Like we lived all over the United States. My mother's husband, when I was very young, was in the Coast Guard. And so it was, we were in lots of different locations. So basically it was an apartment, a trailer, a tenement. And I do mean a tenement. Coast Guard housing, rental house. And then finally we lived with some relatives, and then we moved into a house that was literally falling apart. And that needed to be redone and refixed up. And these were all by 4th grade. So then it was another family home, a commune, a boarding school, in and out of cars and apartments, and following the Grateful Dead. Then military housing, an apartment where the roof was held on by a rock. I'm not kidding you. It was a metal roof, and that piece was held on by a rock, and it leaked like crazy whenever it rained. And that was the landlord solution. And by then I was 23 years old. I'd had it. I was so pissed off that my family was in this position that we were forced to always deal with everybody else's stuff around housing. So they could charge us whatever they wanted. The housing could be in whatever repair or disrepair. We'd have to pay utilities. So here we are, 23, 24 years old. We made $12,000 a year, and we looked into this program called rural development. Because at the time we were paying $650 a month for rent plus utilities in Vermont. And our landlord was a complete slumlord. He didn't care, if things were nasty or gross. He just didn't care. And I just couldn't handle it. I had 2 little children. We had to walk a catwalk to get to our door. So like our children couldn't even get to our front door safely. And so we had a baby and we had a toddler, and I just said, forget it. This is it. I'm going to figure out a way to get us into a house. And so we used a program called Rural Development. And from that, and learning about those systems and learning about those kinds of programs that are in place. So if you've never heard of rural development before, it's a USDA program that's kind of like Housing and Urban Development HUD is for the city. So we lived out in the country, so therefore we could use this program. And we were looking for a house that was out in the country, or country-ish, country adjacent, because obviously we didn't have a lot of money. And they happened to have a house that was for sale. My husband saw it in the paper, and it was for sale by Rural Development. They were selling a property that they had owned. The people, it was foreclosed on essentially. And so programs like Rural Development and HUD, they'll really, really work with you. They don't foreclose easily. So this was someone who was either done with the house or just couldn't afford it. And it was $49,000, and they worked with us to help us get into it. And part of the way that program used to work was that the government was investing in us also and believing in us. So that's why the program worked for us. But our children were 1 year old and 3 years old, and we were in our first home. So by making that leap, we were then paying $427 a month for our taxes and our mortgage. It was a 33-year mortgage. And usually programs like Rural Development, often they'll have a little bit of a longer mortgage time, potentially. It just depends on what kind of programs are being implemented at the time that you apply. And utilities. So the utilities on this house, so it was a 1,400 square foot, 3-bedroom, 1-bath house with a basement. It was kind of ugly, but this thing was so well built that the only thing that we re-shingled the roof when we moved in, and we put up a few banisters like outside and then one down to the basement, and the railing, on the side of the stairs. That's basically like all we had to do. And that was $3,000. And they gave us a year to complete this. So they really worked with us. We had family and friends help us. We re-shingled the roof because we didn't have to do a tear down. We could just shingle over. And it really allowed us to live in a very safe house. The children had a yard. There was a basement. We had like our own laundry. We didn't have like neighbors using our washer and dryer. And on our electric bill, like people were doing that. When we lived in this apartment building, they're like, oh yeah, you can have hookups, but they're in the basement. Well, guess what? Everyone was using them. So they'd hear us come home and they'd run downstairs and take out their family's laundry. And I would go downstairs to do laundry, and my dryer was warm and I hadn't used the dryer. So we were paying for other people's stuff. And it really we always felt like we were put in this position of like being at the mercy of. So this was finally done for us. We had more money. We had more for our family because we were able to make a shift into maybe not the perfect home, but the perfect starter home. So when you start at the beginning, so a lot of people will want their first home to be like their dream home. And it's like, you don't make dream home money yet. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you buy a good solid starter home. So we bought the home for $49,000. We then sold it for $120,000. And we lived overseas for a few years before we came back to the United States. And we bought a house with cash during the housing crisis in North Carolina. That was a project home, and we had a lot of fun, and we almost finished it before we sold it, but we decided to move on, and everything has been building on that. So basically, I've bought a house with Rural Development. I've bought a house with cash. I've bought a house using the VA loan program. We've bought a house that basically paid for us to purchase our dream home because we made a good investment. We've been approved for, multi-million-dollar mortgages, and we've been approved for, a Rural Development mortgage for $49,000. What I'm trying to say here is that the first step in home ownership is a long-term investment in you. So if you can't get the perfect house, start thinking about the perfect house for now. Look, moving from a house to another house is just as much of a pain in the butt if you own it versus a rental. But one's going to make you money and help you take the next step. The other one is just moving to be at the behest of another landlord. Now, that being said, there are a lot of wonderful landlords out there, and there are a lot of fair people who rent homes. But if you are like me and just really, really want to be in a home and start having your money work for you, that may not be the place you want to be. So when you start thinking about home ownership, start thinking about the beginning. It's okay to have the starter home. A lot of people kind of skip that starter home thing and they just want like the perfect home now. But the problem is if you don't have 20% saved and you don't have a contingency money and you don't have money for what happens if something goes wrong for the dream home, that could be a long ways off. Where the starter home, you can come to that much faster and actually start building money for yourself. So when you start thinking about buying a home, start thinking about the very beginnings. What does home ownership mean to me? What can I do to become a homeowner? What programs are available in my community? Start talking to real estate agents. Start talking to mortgage brokers. Start talking to your bank. Start talking to your local housing authority. And some cities have grants to encourage you to buy in them. And when I say city, I literally do not mean massive city. They're all over the United States. There's bank-owned properties. There's city-owned properties. There's properties that are owned by different entities out there. So Rural Development, USDA owned our home. There's places where you can search that. There's resources out there. So talk to your community and find out what's out there. Because when it comes to buying a home, you need to start at the very beginning. And the very beginning is why and how. Why do you want to own a home? What is your motivation for home ownership? How is home ownership going to work for you? Write it down. If you have a partner, work with your partner and say, what is it that we want? What is it that we want right now? Like everyone will be like, oh, I want like 8 acres of lawn. It's like, do you have a big riding lawnmower? Is that in your budget? Or are you going to be pushing to mow this lawn? Or some people will say, oh, I want lots and lots of outbuildings. Can you afford at this point in your life to maintain those outbuildings? Can you afford? And start thinking about things in a realistic manner based on what you spend right now. Because sometimes we just have to take the first part slowly and we need to start thinking about what am I really looking for? So for me, I'll share this with you. For me, home ownership was stability for my children. Home ownership meant that my children had a stable place to live. No one else was in charge of where they lived. It was me, my husband, my kids. We made those decisions. We were the ones who dictated what happened in our yard, what happened in our house, not other people in the building and not a landlord. That freedom was extremely important to me and to my husband. For other people, it may not be. You may want to live in a neighborhood that has an HOA and everything looks great and everybody is on the same page about roof tiles and colored doors, whatever. What I'm saying is that it's really important for you to understand your why. What do you want? Really, like what is it that you really and truly desire from a home? Write it down. Use a whiteboard. Do a notebook. Both of you, if you have a partner, sit down together and both of you write out your list and see where they intersect. Because if we do some of these things in the beginning, it can really help us save a lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of money in getting the first and the right starter home for us. Thanks for listening to Homes by Demetria and have a great day.